You are listening to the Billy Dees Podcast.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. My name is Billy Dees, and if you are checking us out for the first time, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. And there are a lot of new people coming in, so I just want to let you know that we cover a lot of different types of content. Sometimes we do interviews with newsmakers, sometimes with authors, sometimes with artists. Sometimes people just have a very interesting story to tell. They've overcome something or what have you, all of that. We also do a lot of commentary programs, sometimes current events, sometimes news, media, all that stuff. And a lot of times it's just me. Sometimes I have a co-host and so on. So I am so glad that you found us, and I hope you give us a chance with a couple of episodes. And, happy listening. And by the way, there are no paywalls here. So you can subscribe to the Billy Dees Podcast with no paywalls. We do not charge listeners for content, extra content, hidden content, bonus content, all that stuff. We appreciate each and every one of our listeners, and listening to the program is with no paywalls. What we are going to talk about today has been the declining Hollywood box office over the past number of years. We are in production today. This is November 21st, 2025, and the receipts for October 2025 have been very low. As a matter of fact, they are as low as they have been for that time period in about 20, 25, 30 years. So a very low period happening right now. Now, we can talk a little bit about TV programs and other aspects of what's going on here, but I'm going to kind of focus on cinema. And by my estimation, there's been about 5 reasons why there has been a shift away from the Hollywood box office, and that's what we're going to cover today. Now, some of you may expect me to talk about the pandemic, which was a factor. There's absolutely no question the pandemic was a factor in all of this. And there was also the strike. Okay, there was a strike that caused the setback as well. But I kind of feel that those things certainly didn't help by any stretch of the imagination. But the decline has been going on now for years. Both before and after the pandemic, it started. The slope started. And we're going to talk about why that is. And there has been a shift. You might even, if you're of a certain age, you might remember a time when it was the thing to do. It didn't matter what specific movie was playing, but every so often your household, maybe once or twice a month, or maybe once a week even, would say, hey, let's go check out a movie. It's Friday night. Let's go out, get a bite to eat, and check out a movie, get some popcorn, sit there and enjoy the movie, right? Or maybe Saturday afternoon, you would go to the mall, do some shopping, check out a movie. And that has very much given way. It's getting to the point now that people only rarely make an effort to get to see a movie, and it's usually very specific. There's a particular movie they've been waiting for or something that they want to see. Star power is something we're not going to list as one of the primary reasons, but it is a problem. Star power is not what it used to be, and we're going to touch on some of why that is. Tom Cruise might be one of the holdovers. He's a guy that put stunts and all of these other things on the screen. And to me, one of the reasons why that's a good thing is the original, when movies first came out, the idea was with the wing walkers and all that, if you remember some of those stunts and things like that were done in the past, was you could put the audience in a place where they couldn't be in a play. If they went to see a play, there's only so many things that you could do to convince them that you were in an airplane or riding a horse or whatever. So the movies expanded it. They made the world a stage. And as the years went on, the screens got bigger. And these images just became larger than life. And somehow or other, that notion, that approach to movie making has changed. And we're going to get into that. Okay, so let's start with one of the first reasons. I'm here again. We're going to cover 5. I'm going to start with number 1. A lot of people might say that this is one of the chief reasons, one of the primary reasons, and that is streaming. Streaming has drastically changed how the audience goes to see movies, the reason they go to see movies, the attitude that the audience once had. Streaming has changed. And it's both from the studio aspect and from the audience. I believe, and this is just my opinion, that there was a rush from a lot of the producers and movie companies to get into streaming. They realized what happened with the music industry a while back, that this technology has to be embraced, not fought. And I appreciate that. I believe that in theory, in moderation was a good thing, but they went too far in. They spent a lot of money on productions that were not going to make the money back. And there's just too many streaming services now. You hear about a good show and it's like, well, what's that on? Well, I never heard of that, and you have to find it. And then your other show is on another one. And there's somebody else at work talking about this show that they're watching, and it's on something else that you don't have a subscription to. You can't find these shows, let alone subscribe to all of the streaming services that are out there. And when it comes to big titles, here again, the fascination with going out and checking out a movie on the big screen. And I believe that that's a notion. I've talked to a lot of people about this, and I'm not saying that I did research about this necessarily, but I've talked to a lot of people, especially younger folks, who really don't give a damn about the big screen. I remember hearing Steven Spielberg when he talked about E.T., or when he talked about when Jaws first came out. That was an experience. People waited in line to check out those films, and there was an artistic way that those movies were presented on the big screen. You were in an audience that laughed together or jumped together or whatever, and you had this experience in this dark room with this fantastic beam of light going over your head, and what exploded on the screen was this amazing larger-than-life image, and people were just captivated by that, and that's not true anymore. All they want is the movie that they want to see available as quick as possible, and they'll just stream it on their TV or their computer or their tablet. The aura of seeing something on the big screen has lost its luster. And I kind of feel I've never been a big movie, I love movies. I've never been one of those, but I always had an appreciation for really good movies shot in a cinematic way and presented in that fashion. And that simply isn't true anymore. And streaming has done a lot to hurt it. And part of that is that the window between a movie getting made, a big production movie getting made, and it becoming available on streaming is extremely small. I remember a time, here again, back in my day, I'm so old. Well, I probably am, but we won't talk about that. But there was a time when a big movie hit the screen, the time that it took to get on, let's say, VHS, or the time it took it to get on cable TV was enormous. It could be 6 months or a year before a big time movie made its way to your living room. And that's simply not the case anymore. Sometimes it's a couple weeks. So people say, what in the hell do I need to go to check out this movie and deal with traffic and deal with crowds and everything else when it's going to be on my own TV in a couple weeks? And a lot of that is because these movies don't have the impact. The dollar impact just isn't there in the theater. So they're counting on streaming to make it up. And like I said, in a lot of cases, the streaming to quote unquote make it up just isn't bringing in the revenue that other things once did, like VHS. And then later, of course, DVDs and Blu-rays and all these other kind of things. The hard media, the physical media that was once there to help back up a theatrical release is just simply not there anymore. Everything is the convenience of streaming, the digital aspect of you just leaf through a menu on your TV or your tablet or whatever, and boom, there it is. And that convenience has given way to a loss of appreciation of the art form. Going to the theater is just not as exciting as it once was in comparison with checking it out in your living room. And I would say a lot of old school directors, I mentioned Steven Spielberg, he's probably aghast at the fact that people half watch movies now. They have a movie on, they're listening to it in the background, they're leafing through their phone, which is another thing we're going to talk about here in a moment. And the idea that this was something that would transport you into another place, this was like a fantasy of some kind, where you were on the screen experiencing the same things that the characters were experiencing, is just simply not there anymore. All right, so that's the first thing. The streaming has had a big impact. The other thing is the declining marketing impact. And here again, when a big movie was out in the past, I remember when Titanic was being marketed. You would see the flashes of Leonardo DiCaprio on this ship, and it's going down and opening soon, the Titanic. And the fact of the matter is, this ties into what I said about TV. The idea that, let's say if you're under the age of 25, there is a good chance you don't watch TV hardly at all. You may not even own a TV. The chances that you've ever watched the 6 o'clock news under that age is almost zero. Almost zero. So the audience that was once there watching Cheers or watching ER or watching any of those kinds of programs, and they were exposed to advertisements for movies, they're just not there anymore. I would be willing to bet, if you're listening, as you're listening to this podcast right now, if I ask you to name a sitcom that's on TV right now, you would be hard pressed to name one. And here again, there was a time when Friends and all of those other shows were part of people's routine when they came home and relaxed after work or whatever. And that is just simply not there. The audience for anything, and I can tell you as somebody who works in marketing, the audience for anything now is very hard to reach. Traditional trailers don't have it used to be the opening of a trailer was a big deal. And that's just simply not the case. TV ads do not reach viewers the way they used to. I can remember hearing an ad on the radio for Psycho 2. Now, this was back in the 80s. This was when Psycho Part 2 came out. And the announcer said, "It's 22 years later and Norman Bates is coming home." And then you heard Anthony Perkins say, "Oh, I'm all right now." Okay. And I heard that ad on the radio and I just said, I got to check out this movie. This is great. People don't listen to the radio anymore. Okay, so, and when I say that, all my radio friends get mad at me. I don't mean that it's gone away, but it has changed. You have, you don't really have people listening to the radio to hear the latest song anymore because they can get the latest song in a matter of seconds right in the palm of their hand. So the shift with radio right now has been to be community oriented. You got the most successful radio stations right now, the local ones, are very involved in their community. They're very involved in local news. They're very involved in local sports, the high school football games, any type of charity events that are going on there. That's how the relevant radio stations have remained the powerhouse that they have. And Morning Drive, people like to listen to the banter in the morning, hear what the traffic is like, what the weather report is on, what kind of coat should they put on, where there's a traffic jam, all this other kind of stuff, and being reminded all the time of what time it is. They, the radio DJs keep their, hey, right now it's 6:24, 35 degrees outside. Be sure to wear your jacket, blah, 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 blah. And, that keeps them moving in the morning. Okay. So there's still that aspect that radio is relevant. That way that my radio friends won't get mad at me. But the fact of the matter is, it's not what it used to be. The idea of a disc jockey being a star. The biopic of Bruce Springsteen was recently out. I don't know if that was about just the production of one particular album. That movie was, but one of the things I can tell you that I experienced right on the ground floor was WMMS up in Cleveland, which was one of the premier rock and roll stations of the 1970s. They did a lot to help his career. Those disc jockeys did a lot to help Bruce Springsteen. And I just don't know if they have that power anymore because the audience is so fragmented. They're all over the place. So it's very hard to reach them about the latest movie, and it's very hard to reach them about the latest music, whatever it is that you want to do. All right, so that's number 2. The declining marketing impact, how you can just create an awareness for a movie so that people get excited about seeing it. That's very difficult to do now. It has to be done on social media and other things. And here again, there's so many different platforms out there with social media. There's so many things. It is very hard to reach an audience now. Now, the third one, by my estimation, is the activism in general of some of these actors now. It has really changed the way that actors are considered. I said before about the fantasy. When you go to a movie and it's a fantasy movie, you get transported into another time and place. And if it's an action movie, you're rooting for the hero of the movie, right? Whatever. And you get very caught up in these characters that have been created. And if you go back to the 1950s and the 1960s, the studios kept a pretty short leash on the big stars. You didn't see Marilyn Monroe protesting somewhere with a giant vagina on her head. Okay. People like Clark Gable, they were told to smile when you hit the red carpet. When the lights hit you, give him that big smile, but keep your mouth shut. Okay. And the reason for that is, here again, the large screen, the larger than life image. They wanted this idea in the heads of the audience that these are not only larger than life images, but these are larger than life people. These are beautiful, talented people. And now you have, and here again, I'll say this. I mentioned Tom Cruise earlier. I'll say this. During a football game or whatever, you don't have Tom Cruise selling cars in radio ads or in television ads. You don't have Tom Cruise selling Bitcoin and all that bullshit. Okay, but he like I said, he's a holdover from the old school. That's different now. The same people that Hollywood expects you to believe is a superhero is sitting in his underwear during halftime on some commercial about boxer briefs. The image of what a star once was, what an actor once was, what a movie star was, has eroded. And it's been because of too many endorsements and this activism. Even award shows as a whole are way down. When the different award shows come on once in a while, if there's big news breaking about something, and it's usually a controversy that has nothing to do with whatever the award show is about. It's about whether the host or not tweeted something 10 years ago and they got fired. They lost the job because somebody found out that they tweeted something 10 years ago. And then people tune in to see what's going to happen. Other than that, there's no reason. People are tired of being lectured to. And here again, it's not so much I'm tired of being lectured to, but the illusion that these people were something grand is gone. It is gone. These people that are in these movies and TV shows now are no different than your next door neighbor. They're a dumbass just like your next door neighbor. And why do you need to pay money to see them? Why do you need to make an effort to watch them when all you have to do is walk out your back door and listen to your next door neighbor talk about politics? That is where it's at. The illusion that these people are something grand, something larger than life is gone. It is absolutely gone. And I would go as far to say that, the nepotism in Hollywood is not only in front of the camera, but it's behind it. And the problem with that is, I know a lot of people say, well, why do people have a problem with nepotism in Hollywood when, like a plumber has a plumbing business and, he has a son and he hands over that business to his son. Nobody says there's anything wrong with that. Well, actually, I do. And I'll tell you why. Have you ever really dealt extensively with a second generation business owner or a third, even worse, generation business owner? We hear so much about generational wealth, but the fact of the matter is it very seldom gets past the third generation. Very seldom gets past the third generation. A lot of times not even the second. And there's a reason for that. And that is because that plumber who built that business, the new person who has that client base just handed to them, doesn't have the same hunger, doesn't have the same way of adapting to growing their business as their parents did because they don't have to grow it. And what happens is they take that client base for granted, and the next thing you know, that client base starts getting older and dying off. And consequently, the business dies. And that is exactly what's happening in Hollywood right now. You have a bunch of people whose parents grew up in a time when people would go see a movie just for the sake of going to see a movie like I talked about, and that's not there anymore. People don't go to see a movie just for the hell of it, regardless of what it is. Those days are gone. And there's a good chance that if you are under a certain age, I know I talked about 25, if you are under 25, there's a good chance you know a lot more about Logan Paul than you do Denzel Washington or Brad Pitt or whoever. There's a good chance you know more about a social media personality than you know about an actor. And that totally got past them. It totally got past them. And running your mouth and talking down a lot of times, as they did during the pandemic, a lot of these actors got on this pedestal and talked down to all the lowly, dumb people in middle America about all kinds of stuff, about staying home and doing this other thing. Then they hopped on a jet, so worried about global climate change, hopped on a jet and flew somewhere, went on a beach somewhere and did whatever the hell they wanted. And that has really left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouth. And this is all because they just couldn't keep their mouth shut. They couldn't manage what a star used to be. They had to get their 2 cents in, and it destroyed the illusion that I was talking about. It's not escapism when your favorite star is talking about some political bullshit. Your next door neighbor can do the same thing. All right, so that's number 3. Hollywood types just can't shut the F up. And it's hurt them. It has hurt them, even though they don't like to admit it. It has hurt them. The other thing is, I don't know if you can really, everything now is so expensive. And the rising ticket prices and the theater costs are a part of this as well. You know, it's, I almost don't want to blame this entirely on Hollywood. But the fact of the matter is that everything has gotten so expensive now. When you can sit at home and play around on your phone for free. And, you know, it's not just the ticket prices, but it's the popcorn, you know, the Cokes that cost $5. And maybe that single purchase, you know, that $5 Coke isn't a big deal. But if you go there to, you know, you have a couple kids and you bring your spouse and you want to make it a family event, till you buy other ticket prices. Let's say you want to see a children's movie with your family. You bring all those people out and you buy them all popcorn. It's the ticket prices. It's the expensive Cokes. It's the candy. You just blew $100. You blew $150. You know, this is something you could take your entire family to a casual dining restaurant and give them a good meal for that amount of money. And a lot of times the product isn't on the screen. Which brings us to number 5. Here again, I just mentioned the rising ticket prices, which here again, everything's expensive now. Can't pin that just on Hollywood. There's a lot of rising costs and everything in producing these things and everything else, marketing them and everything else. But that's a factor, and it's a factor. That's our number 4 when you factor in number 5, and that is franchise fatigue. Weak original content. Why would I want to go and spend that amount of money to take my family to a show, a movie that I have seen 100 times already? How many movies can they make about flying men or flying women in tights? I mean, the superhero thing has worn itself out. And then, by the way, I was tired of that 10 years ago, you know. And now it seems like they're the only ones that make any money. So Hollywood is just that much more encouraged to make more of them. The biopics now, there's one after another. There's biopics about people that I didn't even know had a story that was worth telling. Why? And why would I want to go spend that amount of money to check out some movie about somebody who doesn't probably have a story worth telling in the first place? And, you know, the sequels, the reboots, the constant stuff over and over again, audiences are getting burned out. And a lot of recent franchise entries just haven't been strong enough to justify the hype. They just haven't been. And, you know, getting back to how difficult it is to market stuff, a lot of original mid-budget films don't have big marketing campaigns to sift through all of the ways that you have to get the word out now. They just don't have it. So it's this lack of originality. And I'll tell you what else goes into this is the CGI. The CGI, you know, so many times I'll have a younger person say to me, you know, about an old movie, well, that looked fake. You know, maybe it did, but the story and the acting and everything else was good. And I believe when the CGI first started coming in, you know, with Jurassic Park and all these other things, they did a good job of mixing CGI with live action, just like they did with animation. It got to the point where, you know, if you look at some of the old Disney films, the 1950s and 1960s, you could tell that the animation and the actors were done at two separate times. But in later years, they did a really good job with Roger Rabbit and some of those others. They did a great job of mixing animation and live action. And they did that for a while with action films, too. It started out the right way, but then it got to be to the point where the CGI became the star. And the CGI by itself just doesn't look that good. It looks even more fake than the practical effects of 25, 30, 40 years ago. You're getting to the point now where some of these movies look like really expensive video games. That is what they look like. And when they're not done well, you have things where the images with the live action are out of proportion. You have things that don't follow the rules of physics in terms of the way things fly, or they slide, or they crash into things. They look very fake. And this CGI now has become relied upon so much that movies get dated very quickly. That's the one thing I will say about very well done practical effects. They always look at least fairly decent as time goes on. And with movies, and I say this about music too, I think one of the things, and here again, audio is kind of like my thing, although I do, a lot of video work as well. But as someone who has a background in professional audio, I can tell you that one of the ways that you can instantly date your work is by relying on the technology of the time. There were certain synthesizers, certain drums that were used electronically in the 1980s that instantly identifies that song as an 80s song. Some of the claps and everything from the 1970s instantly. That song is from the 70s. That's a 70s sound. And it used to be that decades would pass before those songs began to sound dated. Now, a year has passed. And the popular effect of 1 year is now passé the next year. And these songs simply do not have the shelf life that they once did because they are so synthetic. When you record a real band, drums always sound like drums. Guitars always sound like guitars. A singing voice, a singing human voice always sounds like a singing human voice. When you start tampering with these things and creating artificial sounds that don't have a real acoustical reference and you rely too much on them, you instantly date that song. And that is exactly what has happened with a lot of these movies now. These movies instantly, by the time they get to streaming, in March they come out in the theater, in April they're streaming, and they already look old. Now that's an exaggeration, but not by much. Even channel surfing, I'll see a movie that's 4 or 5 years old, and the CGI looks old already. Whatever the effect was that was so popular with so many directors 5 years ago now looks old. It's not cool anymore. The fundamentals of things have changed, and that's something that I preach to a lot of my fellow creators. If you're relying on software to fix something, when I hear we can fix it in post, that just drives me absolutely crazy. That's not what software is for. Learn your craft. If you are recording audio, learn about the dynamics of what you're doing, microphone placement, acoustics, all these other things. Photographer, learn about lenses, learn about filters, learn about lighting, learn about composition. And then at that point, you're using software, you're using computer technology to form what you are doing, to put it in a frame, to edit it. But the fundamentals are there. And the fundamentals of movie making right now are, let's do it in CGI. We don't have to build a set. We don't have to go to location. We just have to create this image. And a lot of times, a lot of people don't know this. That's not even being done in Hollywood. That's all offshore. So the dynamics of what the movie business once was is very much like steel and manufacturing and so many other aspects of what we are doing now, it's not being driven by people who are passionate about movies. It's not being driven by that. And I could say that about so many things. Boeing, one of the reasons that Boeing, the airplane company, and I'm not going to get you too far into this, but just as an example, that company was once driven by engineers. It was once driven by people who were brilliant and had all these great ideas about how to make these incredible airplanes. And it's not anymore. Yes, of course, companies need to make money. Of course. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm a capitalist at heart, but you have to understand what makes a company like Boeing great post-World War II was its innovation. It not only became a successful company, but it changed the world. It changed our society. And somehow or other, it just became about the profits the next quarter. Let's regurgitate these old designs. They're like they did with the 737. Okay. And it just wasn't the same anymore when financial people started taking the direction of the company. Now, hopefully they're changing that. That's my opinion, but hopefully they're changing that. And that right now is a big problem in what's going on with the creativity of Hollywood. It's being driven by people who are looking for the next big hit. What's going to make the money roll in? And it's not about a love of movies. And in the long run, you might get that hit. You might get that hit in the short run. And that's true of so many other things in manufacturing or whatever. In the short term, those strategies might work. But they don't work in the long term. In the long term, what you're stuck with is the same old shit. And that is what we have right now going on with Hollywood. And that's why things are down. Streaming, declining marketing impact, the activism, not being able to keep your mouth shut, rising ticket prices, and franchise fatigue are why Hollywood right now is up against it. I've heard people online talking about what's happening in Los Angeles, and a lot of these lots now are being rented out for events. A lot of these lots now are slower than what they were during the pandemic. And as someone who, like I said, loved movies to some degree, I'm so sad that the luster of that business is beginning to fade. All right, I am Billy Dees. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. This particular podcast is available on the podcast platforms only. There are times when, especially when we do a live podcast, that we do have a video version, but we always make sure that the audio version is available on all of the podcast platforms that carry us. It's very important to us that if you subscribe to the Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite podcast platform, that you have available to you all the episodes. The video casts sometimes are a nice perk. We generally have those featured on the X account, and that is the former Twitter. So if you go to X at Billy Dees and you go to the highlights tab, generally just about all of our live streams, along with other video shorts and things like that, are available on X. And of course, we have updates and we share information about what's going on in the podcast realm. And it's a lot of fun there on X. I got to say, X, for trending live happening real-time events, it just meshes with podcasting very, very well. We're on some of the other social media platforms as well, but X is probably where we focus our attention. But here again, I got to stress, the number one place to find the Billy Dees Podcast is on your favorite podcasting platform. Subscribe with no paywalls. I'm Billy Dees. Lots of great stuff coming up in the coming weeks. Can't wait to present it to you, and we will be talking to you again very, very soon. I'm Billy Dees. Dees and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy Dees Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter at Billy Dees. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.